On her wedding day, everything was supposed to be perfect. The dress, the flowers, the vows. It was the day Rebecca had dreamed of since she was a little girl. But as she made her way down the hallway toward the chapel, something strange happened. Her dog, Max, who had been with her through thick and thin, suddenly blocked her path. He stood there, staring at her with those big brown eyes, not moving, not wagging his tail, just standing firm. Rebecca, a little flustered and anxious with the wedding day jitters, gently called to him. "Max, move," she said softly, thinking it was just a little pre-wedding excitement, nothing more. But Max didn't budge. Instead, he growled low in his throat, something he had never done before. Her heart skipped a beat. Max had always been the most gentle dog, calm, affectionate, always at her side, never once showing any aggression. Yet now, on this most important day of her life, he was blocking her path, and there was something in his gaze that made her feel uneasy. As Rebecca bent down to pet him and coax him aside, she noticed that Max wasn't just standing there stubbornly. His body was tense, his eyes fixated on something. Confused, she glanced around, trying to make sense of it. There was nothing unusual in the hallway, just the soft hum of wedding preparations in the background. But Max wasn't looking at the decorations or the staff running around. He was looking straight at her. It was as though he was trying to communicate something. But what? "Max, come on, let's go," Rebecca urged again. But this time, Max let out a whimper and nudged her hand gently, as if to tell her, "No, don't go." It wasn't like Max to behave this way. His actions were completely out of character, and for the first time, Rebecca felt a deep, unsettling sense of dread in her gut. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was just pre-wedding nerves. After all, what could be so important that it would make her dog act like this on the day she was about to marry the love of her life? Max wasn't normally this clingy, and certainly not this protective. She took a step back, her hand still resting on his fur, and looked into his eyes, trying to understand what he was trying to tell her. But before she could make sense of it, something caught her eye. There, hanging from Max's collar, was a small, folded note, a note that had clearly been placed there just before the ceremony. She hadn't noticed it before. Max's fur usually hid the collar so well. But now, it was so obvious, like a beacon. Her hands shaking, she reached for the note and unfolded it. What she read next left her breathless. "He's coming back for you. I never stopped loving you." The message hit Rebecca like a ton of bricks. She felt her knees weaken and her heart race as the realization flooded in. The words weren't from her fiancé, but from her ex, James. The man she had loved before she met her soon-to-be husband. The man who had left her years ago without a word. She had thought of him often, but never expected to hear from him again. Yet here it was, his words, his love, all over again. The truth hit her like a wave crashing over her, drowning her in memories and emotions she thought she had buried long ago. Why was he doing this now on her wedding day? What did it all mean? The man who had left her once was now sending messages through her dog. Max had been her companion, her comfort, and now, he was more than just a dog. He was the messenger of a truth she wasn't prepared to face. As the weight of the note sank in, she realized that her heart was no longer sure where it belonged. Was she ready to marry the man she was about to pledge her life to? Or had James's sudden reappearance stirred up feelings she couldn't ignore? Rebecca stood frozen in the hallway, the note still trembling in her hands. Her mind raced as she tried to process the words that had just shattered the calm of her wedding day. "He's coming back for you. I never stopped loving you." James, the man who had broken her heart years ago, the man she thought she had left behind. She looked down at Max, still sitting stubbornly in front of her, his brown eyes fixed on her, as if he knew the chaos his message had caused. "What does this mean, Max?" she whispered to him, her voice barely audible, as her heart began to pound in her chest. She had spent years moving on, rebuilding her life, and now, with just a few words on a piece of paper, everything felt uncertain again. Max, sensing her confusion, stood up and nudged her gently, as if trying to comfort her. But Rebecca couldn't move. Her wedding was about to start, her guests were waiting, and yet, the past she had buried had suddenly resurfaced, dragging her down with it. She swallowed hard and tried to steady her breathing. Was she really about to marry the man she loved? The man who was standing at the altar, waiting for her? Or was she still in love with James, the man who had left without explanation, only to return now, on the day she was to start a new chapter. The conflicting emotions tugged at her, each one threatening to pull her in a different direction. She looked down at the note again, as if the words might suddenly make more sense. But they didn't. They only deepened her confusion. James, she whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop herself. Her hands shook as she crumpled the note in her fist. What was she supposed to do now? She couldn't go to the altar and marry someone else with these thoughts racing through her mind. She couldn't pretend that everything was perfect when, deep down, she knew that a part of her was still holding on to James. Max barked softly, as if calling her back to reality. She looked at him, and, for a moment, she felt the weight of his loyalty. He had always been there for her, a constant in her life, never judging, always by her side. But now, even he couldn't solve the problem that was unfolding inside her heart. Rebecca took a deep breath and made her decision. She needed to speak with James. She needed to hear from him, to understand why he had come back into her life at this moment of all moments. She couldn't go through with the wedding without answers. I have to know, Max. I can't do this without knowing the truth. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, leaving the ceremony behind her. Her heart ached with every step she took, but she knew she had to find James, had to face whatever truth was waiting for her. Max followed her closely, his presence a silent reassurance that, no matter what happened, she wasn't alone. As Rebecca stepped outside, the bright sun almost blinded her, but the weight of her decision still felt heavier than the world around her. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number she hadn't expected to call today. The line rang once, twice, before a familiar voice answered, a voice that had once been so full of love and hope. Rebecca? James's voice was thick with emotion, and just hearing it made her heart ache. I didn't think you'd call, he continued softly. I had to, Rebecca said, her voice shaking. I need to know why you're here, why you came back now. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when James spoke again, his voice was filled with regret. Rebecca, I never stopped loving you. I know I left, and I know I hurt you, but I couldn't forget you. I had to see you today, on your wedding day, to tell you the truth. His words hung in the air, and Rebecca felt a surge of emotions. She had never imagined hearing those words from him again, and yet here they were, pulling her back into the past. What truth? She asked, her heart racing with anticipation. She needed to know, more than anything. The truth is, I never stopped hoping for us. I made mistakes, Rebecca, but I'm not the man I was when I left. I came back to tell you that I'm still in love with you, and I always will be. His confession left Rebecca breathless. For a moment, she stood there, unable to speak, her heart torn between the life she had built and the love she had once lost. I never wanted to hurt you, James added softly, but I couldn't let you marry him without telling you how I feel. Rebecca closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. She had to make a choice now, a choice that would change the course of her life forever. Rebecca stood frozen in the hallway, the note still trembling in her hands. Her mind raced as she tried to process the words that had just shattered the calm of her wedding day. He's coming back for you. I never stopped loving you. James, the man who had broken her heart years ago, the man she thought she had left behind. She looked down at Max, still sitting stubbornly in front of her, his brown eyes fixed on her, as if he knew the chaos his message had caused. What does this mean, Max? She whispered to him, her voice barely audible, as her heart began to pound in her chest. She had spent years moving on, rebuilding her life, and now, with just a few words on a piece of paper, everything felt uncertain again. Max, sensing her confusion, stood up and nudged her gently, as if trying to comfort her. But Rebecca couldn't move. Her wedding was about to start, her guests were waiting, and yet, the past she had buried had suddenly resurfaced, dragging her down with it. She swallowed hard and tried to steady her breathing. Was she really about to marry the man she loved? The man who was standing at the altar, waiting for her? Or was she still in love with James, the man who had left without explanation, only to return now, on the day she was to start a new chapter? The conflicting emotions tugged at her, each one threatening to pull her in a different direction. She looked down at the note again, as if the words might suddenly make more sense. But they didn't. They only deepened her confusion. James, she whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop herself. Her hands shook as she crumpled the note in her fist. What was she supposed to do now? She couldn't go to the altar and marry someone else with these thoughts racing through her mind. She couldn't pretend that everything was perfect when, deep down, she knew that a part of her was still holding on to James. Max barked softly, as if calling her back to reality. She looked at him, and, for a moment, she felt the weight of his loyalty. He had always been there for her, a constant in her life, never judging, always by her side. But now, even he couldn't solve the problem that was unfolding inside her heart. Rebecca took a deep breath and made her decision. She needed to speak with James. She needed to hear from him, to understand why he had come back into her life. At this moment, of all moments, she couldn't go through with the wedding without answers. I have to know, Max. I can't do this without knowing the truth. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, leaving the ceremony behind her. Her heart ached with every step she took, but she knew she had to find James, had to face whatever truth was waiting for her. Max followed her closely, his presence a silent reassurance that, no matter what happened, she wasn't alone. As Rebecca stepped outside, the bright sun almost blinded her, but the weight of her decision still felt heavier than the world around her. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number she hadn't expected to call today. The line rang once, twice, before a familiar voice answered, a voice that had once been so full of love and hope. Rebecca? James's voice was thick with emotion, and just hearing it made her heart ache. I didn't think you'd call, he continued softly. I had to, Rebecca said, her voice shaking. I need to know why you're here, why you came back now. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when James spoke again, his voice was filled with regret. Rebecca, I never stopped loving you. I know I left, and I know I hurt you, but I couldn't forget you. I had to see you today, on your wedding day, to tell you the truth. His words hung in the air, and Rebecca felt a surge of emotions. She had never imagined hearing those words from him again, and yet here they were, pulling her back into the past. What truth? She asked, her heart racing with anticipation. She needed to know, more than anything. The truth is, I never stopped hoping for us. I made mistakes, Rebecca, but I'm not the man I was when I left. I came back to tell you that I'm still in love with you, and I always will be. His confession left Rebecca breathless. For a moment, she stood there, unable to speak, her heart torn between the life she had built and the love she had once lost. I never wanted to hurt you, James added softly, but I couldn't let you marry him without telling you how I feel. Rebecca closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. She had to make a choice now, a choice that would change the course of her life forever. Rebecca's mind raced as she stepped into her car, the cool leather of the seat offering little comfort against the storm of emotions inside her. She could still hear James's voice in her ears, his words echoing through her thoughts. I'm still in love with you, and I always will be. She had never expected to hear those words again, not after all this time, and certainly not on the day of her wedding. It was like a piece of her past had suddenly crashed into her present, and now she was caught in the middle, unsure of what to do next. The drive felt long, even though it was only a few miles to Thomas's family's beach house where their wedding reception was set to take place. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the horizon, but Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that everything around her was out of focus, as if she were watching her life from a distance. Max, who had followed her into the car, lay quietly at her feet, his steady breathing a reminder that, at least in this moment, she wasn't truly alone. She glanced at him, her hand reaching down to gently scratch behind his ears. Max had always been a calming presence, and right now, she needed his reassurance more than ever. As she neared the beach house, Rebecca's heart began to pound. She had promised herself that she would go through with the wedding, that she would marry Thomas. He was a good man, the kind of man anyone would be lucky to have. But now, with James's confession weighing heavily on her, Rebecca didn't know if she could go through with it. She parked the car in front of the beach house, her hands trembling as she turned off the engine. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was distant, almost drowned out by the chaotic thoughts in her mind. The sun was almost completely set now, and the warm light was fading fast. She took a deep breath and opened the car door. Max hopped out beside her, as if sensing her indecision. As they walked toward the front door, Rebecca's mind was still on James, on the love they had shared, and the way he had left without a word. Was it really possible that he still loved her? And if so, what did that mean for her future with Thomas? She didn't know. All she knew was that she had to make a choice. She couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. As Rebecca stepped into the beach house, she was greeted by Thomas's warm smile. He looked handsome in his suit, his dark eyes full of excitement and hope. He reached for her hands, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice full of affection. For a moment, Rebecca felt the familiar comfort of his presence. This was the man she had planned to marry, the man she had built a life with. And yet, as his hands rested on her shoulders, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. She had always admired Thomas's steady, grounded nature, but right now, it wasn't enough to silence the doubts that swirled in her mind. As they moved toward the reception area, Rebecca found herself scanning the room, searching for something, anything, that would help her make sense of the whirlwind she was in. The guests were all gathered, chatting and laughing, the soft hum of conversation filling the air. The decorations were beautiful, everything was in place, and yet Rebecca felt a deep sense of disconnect. Her eyes landed on the door, the one that led outside to the beach. She had always loved the sound of the waves, the sense of peace they brought. She excused herself from Thomas and walked toward the door, her footsteps quick and decisive. Max trotted along beside her, sensing that she needed space to think. As Rebecca stepped onto the beach, the cool breeze tousled her hair. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the waves fill her ears, and then, with a deep breath, she took out her phone. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to talk to James. She dialed his number, her fingers shaking as she held the phone to her ear. The phone rang, and Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she had to hear his voice one more time to understand what he really wanted. The line clicked, and then his voice, low and filled with emotion, came through. "Rebecca?" James said softly. Her breath caught in her throat. "I need to know why you're doing this," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now? Why on my wedding day?" There was a long pause, and Rebecca could almost hear him thinking. Then, slowly he spoke. "Because I never stopped loving you, Rebecca. I thought I had moved on, but I haven't. And I couldn't let you go without telling you the truth." His words, full of sincerity, left Rebecca breathless. She didn't know what to say. She had come this far, and now, here she was, standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Rebecca stood there on the beach, the sound of the waves crashing in the distance, her phone pressed to her ear, her heart pounding in her chest. James's words still echoed in her mind. "I never stopped loving you. I thought I had moved on, but I haven't. And I couldn't let you go without telling you the truth." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions that were swirling inside her. She had never expected this. She had never expected him to come back into her life. Not like this, not on the day she was about to marry someone else. But now that he had, Rebecca found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about herself, about her future, and about the love she had spent years building with Thomas. Her mind raced as she walked along the shore, the sand cool beneath her feet. She couldn't stop thinking about James. The connection they had shared, the love that had once felt so real, was still there, lingering in the back of her mind, refusing to let go. And yet, she had built a life with Thomas, a life that was stable, safe, and filled with love. He was the man who had always been there for her, the man who had supported her, the man she was about to marry. But now, with James's confession, everything felt uncertain. "What am I supposed to do?" Rebecca whispered to herself, the words lost in the wind. She didn't have the answers, and she knew she couldn't make a decision like this on the beach, not when her heart was so torn. She had to go back. She had to face Thomas and figure out what she truly wanted. But as she turned to walk back toward the beach house, a part of her couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right choice. Was she really meant to marry Thomas? Or was she simply too afraid to confront the feelings that James had awakened in her? When Rebecca returned to the beach house, she found Thomas standing by the door, waiting for her, his face full of concern. "You okay?" he asked gently, his eyes scanning her face, looking for any sign of distress. She smiled weakly, trying to push the confusion aside, trying to convince herself that she was ready for this, that she was ready to marry him. "I'm fine," she said, her voice betraying her. Thomas reached for her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "I'm so glad you're here," he said, his voice filled with affection. "Everyone's waiting for us." Rebecca nodded, her heart heavy in her chest. She couldn't ignore the way her thoughts kept drifting back to James, but she knew she couldn't let him disrupt everything she had worked so hard to build with Thomas. She had to let go of the past. She had to move forward. But as she and Thomas stepped into the reception hall, the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses felt distant, almost surreal. Her heart wasn't in it, not in the way it should be. She found herself looking for any excuse to pull away, to step outside for a moment, to clear her head. As the evening wore on, Rebecca found herself slipping away from the festivities. She stepped outside again, the cool night air a welcome relief from the heat of the crowded room. Max followed her, as always, his presence a quiet reminder that, at least for now, she wasn't alone. She leaned against the railing of the deck, her thoughts racing once again. She had promised herself that she would marry Thomas. She had told herself that he was the one, that he was the man she had chosen. But was it enough? Was it enough to build a life on the foundation of a love that had never felt as strong as the love she had shared with James? The sound of footsteps behind her pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Thomas standing there, a concerned look on his face. "You disappeared again," he said, his voice soft. "What's going on, Rebecca? I can tell something's wrong." Rebecca looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of the decision she had yet to make. I need some space," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded, understanding the tension in her voice. "I'll give you space. But when you're ready, we need to talk. This isn't something you can keep to yourself, Rebecca." His words hit her like a ton of bricks. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when her heart was so conflicted. She needed to face it. She needed to face him. She needed to face the love that had never really left her. "I know," she said softly, her voice filled with regret. "I just need to figure this out." Thomas gave her one last look, then turned and walked back inside, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts once again. She wasn't ready to make a choice, but she knew that, sooner or later, she would have to. The question was, which love would she choose? Rebecca stood on the balcony, staring out into the night, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The sounds of the reception inside felt distant, almost muffled, as her heart continued to race with the weight of her decision. Max, her ever-present companion, sat at her feet, his calming presence a stark contrast to the storm that raged within her. She had never imagined this day would turn out like this. The man she had loved, the man she had thought was lost to her forever, had come back into her life at the most unexpected moment. And now, she was stuck between two worlds, two loves, and a future that felt more uncertain than ever. The cool night air brushed against her skin, but it did little to cool the heat that burned in her chest. She glanced at her phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Thomas. "I'm waiting for you, Rebecca. Please come back inside. We need to talk." Her heart clenched as she read the message, the reality of the situation settling in. She had promised herself she would marry Thomas, the man who had been her rock, her support, the man she had built a life with. And yet, James's sudden reappearance had shaken her to her core, forcing her to question everything. She had always thought love was simple, that it was about making a choice and sticking with it. But now, standing on this balcony, she realized that love was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from James. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. "Rebecca," James's voice came through, smooth and familiar, yet filled with emotion. "I know you're struggling with this, but I need you to know that I'm not asking you to make a decision right away. I just needed to tell you the truth. I never stopped loving you." His words hit her like a wave, washing over her, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, trying to process the overwhelming emotions that surged within her. "I don't know what to do, James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm about to marry someone else. I've made a life with him." She paused, trying to steady her breath. "But you've always been a part of me, and now you're here, and I don't know what that means." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and when James spoke again, His voice was soft, understanding. I get it, Rebecca. I'm not asking you to throw everything away. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. His words were comforting, but they also made everything feel more complicated. She couldn't just ignore the connection they had, the love they had shared. And yet, she couldn't turn her back on Thomas, the man who had stood by her, the man who had given her everything. I need to go back inside, Rebecca said finally, her voice steadying as she made her decision. I can't keep running from this. I have to face it. I'll talk to you later. She ended the call and stared at the phone for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She had to confront it, no matter how painful it might be. With a deep breath, she turned and made her way back into the house. The reception was still in full swing, but as she stepped into the room, she felt the eyes of everyone on her, as if they could sense the turmoil inside her. Thomas was standing by the bar, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. I've been waiting for you, he said, his voice warm and full of love. We need to talk. Rebecca nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she knew she had to make. She had come this far, and now she had to face the consequences. She couldn't keep running from the truth, and she couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. As Thomas reached for her hand, Rebecca felt a surge of emotions that she couldn't ignore. She had to choose, and whatever choice she made, it would change the course of her life forever. Rebecca stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, as she felt Thomas's hand gently grasp hers. His touch was warm, comforting, but in that moment, it felt distant. She had always felt safe in his presence, but now, with the weight of James's confession pressing down on her, it was as if a wall had been built between them. Thomas led her over to a quiet corner of the reception hall, away from the crowd, his face full of concern. I can tell something's wrong, Rebecca, he said softly, his eyes searching hers for answers. What's going on? You've been distant all evening. She felt the tension building in her chest, the need to say something, anything, to explain the chaos she felt inside. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she glanced down at Max, who was sitting quietly at her feet, sensing her unease. I've been thinking, she began, her voice shaky. I've been thinking about everything, about what I want, about what's right. Thomas tilted his head, his brow furrowing with concern. What do you mean? You're here with me. We're about to start our lives together. Rebecca swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. She had made so many plans, so many promises to herself and to Thomas. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. And yet, here she was, torn between the man who had always been there for her and the man who had left her but still held a piece of her heart. I don't know if I can do this, Thomas, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Thomas stepped back slightly, his face clouded with confusion. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low, almost afraid to hear the answer. What's going on, Rebecca? She felt her stomach twist with guilt, knowing the pain her words would cause. She had never intended to hurt him, but she couldn't pretend anymore. James called me, she said softly. He told me he still loves me. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Thomas's face went pale, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. James? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The guy who left you all those years ago? Rebecca nodded, her heart aching at the confusion and hurt in Thomas's eyes. Yes, she said, her voice cracking. He came back today, right before the wedding. And he told me he never stopped loving me. She paused, watching the shock and hurt settle into Thomas's expression. I don't know what to do, Thomas. I thought I was ready to marry you, but now I'm not so sure. Thomas stepped back, his face a mixture of disbelief and hurt. You're still in love with him, aren't you? He asked, his voice low and strained. After everything, after all we've been through, you're still thinking about him? Rebecca closed her eyes, her chest tightening with the weight of his words. She didn't know how to explain the conflict inside her. How could she explain the love she still had for James, the man who had been part of her life for so long, even though he had left her? And how could she explain the love she had for Thomas, the man who had given her everything, the man who had stood by her, never asking for anything in return? I don't want to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I can't ignore what James said. I can't ignore the way he makes me feel. There was a long silence between them, a painful, heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. Rebecca," he said, his eyes full of pain. "I don't know if I can stand here and pretend everything is okay when I know you're thinking about someone else." Rebecca felt a wave of guilt wash over her as she watched the hurt in his eyes. She had never wanted this, never wanted to hurt him, but now, everything felt out of her control. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what to do." Thomas shook his head slowly, stepping back further. "I need some time, Rebecca. I need some space to think about this." His words hit her like a ton of bricks, and she felt a deep, aching emptiness in her chest as he turned and walked away. She watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart breaking with every step he took. She had never imagined this moment, never imagined that the man she loved would walk away from her on their wedding day. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She had to figure out what her heart truly wanted, and she couldn't do that with both of them standing in front of her, waiting for her to choose. She looked down at Max, who was still sitting quietly at her feet, as if waiting for her to make a decision. But she didn't have an answer, not yet. All she knew was that she was standing on the edge of a new chapter, one that was filled with uncertainty, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Rebecca stood there, her heart still heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. She could hear the muffled sound of the reception in the background, but it felt as though she were standing in a different world altogether. Thomas's departure had shaken her more than she cared to admit, but she couldn't deny the truth that had been lingering inside her for so long. She had to make a choice, but it felt as if time itself was slipping away from her. The night was cool, the stars bright overhead, and Max sat loyally by her side, as if waiting for her to find the right path. She ran a hand through her hair, her mind spinning with thoughts of Thomas, of James, and of the love she thought she had lost. What was she supposed to do? Her eyes wandered back to the beach house, where the soft glow of the lights spilled out from the windows. The sounds of laughter and music echoed through the walls, a stark contrast to the confusion that clouded her mind. She had been so sure of everything before today, so sure that her life with Thomas was everything she had wanted. But now, with James's words fresh in her mind, with the memories of their love still so vivid, everything felt uncertain. The moments they had shared, the connection that had never fully gone away, were now impossible to ignore. As much as she had tried to move on, a part of her still ached for him, for the life they might have had together. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a moment, Rebecca froze. It was a message from Thomas. "I need to talk to you when you're ready. Please don't shut me out." Her chest tightened as she read the words. She had promised herself she would marry Thomas, that he was the one she was supposed to be with. He had been her support, her safe haven. But now, standing on this beach, alone with her thoughts, she wasn't sure what she felt anymore. Her heart was torn between two people, two futures, and it felt like no matter what she chose, she would lose something precious. The sound of the ocean seemed to mirror her thoughts, the waves crashing against the shore, relentless and unforgiving. She had always found peace in the rhythm of the ocean, but tonight, it only reminded her of the conflict she was facing. What did she truly want? The love she had with James, the man who had left her, or the life she had with Thomas, the man who had stood by her all these years? She didn't have an answer. She knew only that she couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. She had to face it, whatever it was. With a deep breath, Rebecca turned back toward the beach house. Max followed her closely, as if sensing the shift in her mood. As she walked back inside, the chatter of the guests became louder, but it didn't ease the tightness in her chest. She found Thomas standing by the bar, his eyes filled with hope and concern. "Rebecca," he said softly as she approached. "I know you're hurting, but we need to talk." She met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. "I know," she replied quietly. I don't know what to say." Thomas reached for her hand, his touch warm, but his eyes searching, waiting for her to open up. "You don't have to say anything yet," he said gently, "but I need you to know that I'm here. I love you, and I want to be with you. But I can't do this if you're not sure." His words struck a chord deep within her. He was offering her everything, and yet, she couldn't give him the certainty he needed. She glanced down at her hand, the ring on her finger suddenly feeling heavier than ever. She was standing on the precipice of a decision that would change her life forever. And in that moment, all Rebecca could think about was the truth she had been avoiding. She had to confront it, no matter the cost. She had to decide what kind of love she wanted in her life, and she couldn't do that by running away. She had to be honest, not only with Thomas, but with herself. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I need time. I need to figure this out." Thomas nodded, his expression softening, though the hurt in his eyes was still evident. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But know that I'm here whenever you're ready." Rebecca took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had made a promise to herself, and now she had to find the strength to keep it. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of the past. She had to step forward, even if she didn't know where that step would lead. Rebecca stood at the edge of the beach, the moonlight shimmering on the waves, as she tried to calm the turmoil swirling inside her. It had been hours since her conversation with Thomas, and yet her heart felt just as conflicted as when she had first stepped outside. She had promised herself that she would figure it out, that she would know what she wanted, but the truth was, she still didn't know. Her mind kept drifting to James and the love they had shared, the undeniable connection that had been rekindled with just a few words. But then, there was Thomas, the man who had stood by her side for so long, the man who had never given her a reason to doubt his love. She couldn't just walk away from him, not after everything they had built together. Yet, how could she ignore the way her heart had been pulled back to James? She took a deep breath, trying to clear her mind. Max sat beside her, his presence grounding her in a way nothing else could. She glanced down at him, running her hand through his fur, feeling the calm energy he exuded. He had always been there for her, a constant companion, a symbol of loyalty. And right now, in the midst of her confusion, he was the one thing she knew she could trust. Rebecca knew she had to make a decision, but the weight of it felt almost too much to bear. Could she really choose one life over the other? Could she walk away from Thomas, the man who had given her stability and love, for the man who had once left her without explanation? As she stood there, the wind whipping through her hair, she realized that she couldn't keep avoiding the truth. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She had to face what was in her heart, no matter how painful or difficult it was. With a final glance at the beach, Rebecca turned and walked back to the beach house, her mind made up. When she walked through the door, the noise of the reception hit her immediately. The laughter, the music, the chatter, but none of it seemed real anymore. She walked past the guests, her heart heavy with the decision she had just made. She found Thomas standing by the bar, his eyes searching for hers, his face a mixture of hope and concern. "Rebecca," he said softly, his voice full of longing. "We need to talk. Please." She met his gaze, her heart aching with the weight of the moment. This was the man she had loved, the man she had promised to marry. But now, with the truth of her feelings laid bare, she had to be honest with him. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I've been so confused, and I don't want to hurt you. But I have to be honest with you. I still have feelings for James." His face fell, the hurt obvious in his eyes, but he didn't look away. "I know," he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. I can feel it in the way you've been acting." Rebecca swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "But I can't keep pretending that I'm not still in love with him." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, his face a mixture of pain and understanding. "I don't know if I can do this, Rebecca," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I don't know if I can just stand here and watch you choose someone else." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had never imagined this moment, never imagined that the man she loved would walk away from her because of the past she had never truly let go of. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I know, Rebecca. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. But I can't be with someone who isn't sure about me. I can't live in the shadows of someone else." His words stung, and Rebecca felt as if the